WWE was at it again this past week. Again, this went up right after I finished recording last week, so I didn't have a chance to talk about it. But boy, do they love to stir things up so much. They must have Emeril Lagasse running their social media team with all the shit stirring that they've been doing. They were back on their Instagram page this past week with another list. This one, what they call the top 5 betrayals in WWE history. And the one thing I do love about these lists is that it gives me a chance to correct them and do my own lists. And that's really why they do them. They want to get people talking. They want to create traffic. I get it. But when you do a list like this of the top 5 betrayals of all time, and you list the Bella Twins ambushing Ronda Rousey as the 5th biggest betrayal of all time, well, I don't know how anybody could take you seriously. I know they want recent stuff on there to appeal to their newer fans. I mean, is the Shield breakup not recent enough? Because that was on there. Is the Festival of Friendship not recent enough? That was on there too. The Bella Twins turning on Ronda Rousey. The Shield were together for, 2 years before Seth Rollins turned on Reigns and Ambrose? The Bellas teamed with Ronda for 2 matches before they turned on her. Is that really a betrayal? Nikki once turned on her own sister. That didn't make the list. She said that she wished her sister died in the womb. The rest of this list, honestly, wasn't even that bad. Kevin Owens turning on Chris Jericho in the Festival of Friendship was number 4. Marty Jannetty diving through the barbershop window in a daring attempt to escape was number 3. Evolution dumping Randy Orton was number 2. And Rollins breaking up the Shield got the number 1 all-time spot for greatest betrayal. Boy, they sure do love the Shield, don't they? First, they ranked them the number 1 greatest faction of all time. Now they get the top spot for the greatest betrayal of all time. 4 out of the 5 on their list were actually not bad choices. It's not how my top 5 would look, as you'll see, because what I've done here is I have decided, because I do have fun with these things, I decided to go and rank my own list of not the top 5, not the top 10, but the top 15 greatest betrayals in WWE history. And putting the list together, it's tough because, like I said, when I first put the list together, there were 26, I think I had listed. Now you got to cut it down. Whatever, that's easy enough to do. When you get into the whole ranking business, which is so subjective anyway, but it's tough. It's not easy when you really sit here and you get down to those last few and you're sort of splitting hairs over what goes where. It's tough, but it's fun. So anyway, let me just say this before I get into the list. Honorable mentions for the non-WWE betrayals, because I did not include non-WWE betrayals on this list. Had I done so, the Freebirds turning on Kerry Von Erich in World Class back in 1982 would have been on there. The 2 times that the Horsemen turned on Sting in WCW, I think it was 1990 and 1995, that would be on there. Sting never really did learn his lesson now, did he? And of course, one of the all-time great betrayals in wrestling, Hulk Hogan, betraying all of his Hulkamaniacs and betraying WCW to join with Hall and Nash to form the NWO. If I open this list up beyond WWE, Hogan joining the NWO would easily be top 3. So I think those deserve some honorable mentions here before we move on. Now, my list is the way I did this is, my list is as much about the betrayal itself and how it played out on TV more than, measuring the lasting impact of it. There's no set criteria where, did it do big business and how did it affect the overall wrestling business? Who cares? That's not what this list is about. And as I always say with these things, your criteria will be different than mine. So I'm ranking these, whatever the order, these are the ones that belong in the top 15. We'll start from 15, work our way down. Number 15, and I think this absolutely belongs somewhere on here, and I have this at number 15, is Sensational Sherri, Queen Sherri, turning on the Macho King at WrestleMania 7. I struggled. I wanted to rank this higher, but I couldn't. There were others I couldn't put I just couldn't put this ahead of some of the others on here. But I wanted to find a place on this list because I don't think this gets enough love, honestly. It is part of what is, to me, one of the all-time great matches and moments in WrestleMania history. The retirement match, WrestleMania 7, Macho King Randy Savage against the Ultimate Warrior in what I would consider to be the Warrior's best match that he ever had in his life. And at the end of the match, now, Savage and Sherry had been an item together on television for, I'm going to say, at least a year, right? Actually, probably more than that. They were probably together for a good 2 years, 2 or 2.5 years. So they had been together for a very long time. Macho King, Queen Sherry. Savage loses. Sherry is shocked. She is distraught. She pulls off her garment or whatever. She gets in the ring. She kicks her shoes off. She's yelling at Savage. And the guy just lost, for crying out loud. His career is over. Talk about kicking a man when he's down. She literally begins to kick him when he is down. She buries a field goal kick in his ribs. People are booing. This was also a great turn for Savage. He was a heel. By the time this whole thing was over, Elizabeth ran down and she couldn't take it anymore. She threw Sherry out of the ring. Macho and Liz reunited. It was just, you talk about perfect storytelling. This was so awesome. But I would consider that to be a big betrayal, for a group, a couple like that had been together on television for so long. And for her to just literally turn on him right in an instant and start kicking the shit out of him, I had to work that into my list. And so I have that at number 15. Number 14, another one that I quibbled with putting this higher. And I guess this will probably go to how old you were, how old you are, but also how early you started watching the WWE product. I think if you were a fan going back to the 70s, for example, that this would probably be higher on your list. But Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno Sammartino was a very big deal back when this happened, I guess, in 1980. Zbyszko had been Bruno's protege for a long time. And he had wanted to sort of break out of Bruno's shadow. They had set up on television. He put a challenge out to him, a friendly challenge for a friendly exhibition. And Bruno accepted. And during the match, you can find it on YouTube, Zbyszko was getting very frustrated because Bruno is, basically mopping the floor with him. He's embarrassing him and wrestling him to the mat. And, Zbyszko kind of falls out of the ring. And he climbs back into the ring, and he viciously attacks Bruno. Starts beating him down. He grabs a chair from the outside, hits him in the head with the chair. Bruno blades. He's all busted open. This was a big betrayal at that time, and it led to the famous cage match that they had at Shea Stadium that year. Number 13, Stephanie McMahon turning on her father at Armageddon, 1999, big Triple H versus Vince McMahon main event. And this was when Stephanie was married to Triple H. He had drugged her and taken her to the little chapel of love in Las Vegas, and they got hitched. And so Stephanie was sitting in the front row for this match, watching her father take on her husband. And at the end of the match, she picked up the sledgehammer. She took the sledgehammer away from Vince, and she was like, let me do it. She was going to hit Triple H with it, but she couldn't do it. Couldn't bring herself to do it. It led to Triple H getting the win. And then we come to find out at the end of the match, Stephanie smiles, they embrace, and an alliance is born. The McMahon-Helmsley regime officially kicks off. We're still living through the McMahon-Helmsley regime to this very day. Number 12 is Evolution dumping Randy Orton. Randy Orton had just won the World Heavyweight title at SummerSlam. He came out on TV the next night. I think he beat Benoit in a rematch. They have him hoisted up on Batista's shoulders, and they're walking all around the ring. And then that great moment, I thought this was very well done, where Triple H is giving him the thumbs up, as I'm sure he did to many young talent back then, gives them the thumbs up and smiles in their face, and then comes the thumbs down. And Batista gives Orton the electric chair. They beat the hell out of him. They bust him open. They leave him bloody and laying. If you isolate it just on its own, this was a great betrayal, I think, the way that this was pulled off. Then you look at what happened in the follow-up, and it's a complete abomination, right? Because what they did to Orton was just ridiculous. Orton lost the championship immediately back the next month. He lost it to Triple H. And they did Orton no favors through the way they booked him. And supposedly it was building to Orton and Triple H at WrestleMania 21. Well, you look at the way they booked this guy. And it's no wonder that the people couldn't get behind him as much as they got behind Batista. Batista was the big badass enforcer of Evolution. People got, behind him just naturally and unexpectedly. And it ended up being Batista and Triple H at WrestleMania. So I guess you could say in a roundabout way, Batista owes his entire career to the bad booking of Randy Orton back at the end of 2004. He could thank the creative team. The same creative team he bashes all the time. He could thank the creative team for that. Number 11. Now, WWE had this as number 1. I have this at number 11 on my list, is The Shield. The Shield being broken up by Seth Rollins, and there may be some people saying, how could this be number 11? This isn't even in your top 10. No, it's not. When I sat down and put this list together, I thought it would be. And then I was moving things around, and I said, you know what? I don't think I can put this in my top 10. And if it's in your top 10, that's fine. And it was a great betrayal, but I don't believe it was a top 10 betrayal when you look at all of the different ones in WWE history. So I have this on my list at number 11, and I just know when it happened. I remember watching Raw when it happened, and there's this great moment right before Rollins connects with the chair to Roman's back. You can hear a crowd, you can hear a fan in the crowd in the front row just say, no, right before he hits him with the chair. That guy was all of us. I did not want to see the Shield break up. I thought there was still mileage left in them as babyfaces. They had basically turned babyface a few months earlier after their, the feuded with Evolution. And I still thought there was mileage in the Shield together. I was still enjoying their run together in all the 6-man tags. And then they went and they broke them up. And I was very upset about this. I still am. Still very bitter about that. But in terms of a betrayal, I mean, they had been together for almost 2 years. They had run roughshod over the company. They were featured as a true main event act. And for him to not stab them in the back, but literally strike them in the back with a chair, it was a depressing visual. Again, I think wrong time for it, but still a big betrayal in history. Then we get into the top 10, and this is where I struggled. I was going back and forth a lot whether I should put the Shield at number 10 and put this at number 11. And I decided that I actually enjoyed, well, personally, I enjoyed this more. But I just think this was really well done, and this belongs in the top 10. It's in the 10 spot for me, and that is the Festival of Friendship with Chris Jericho and Kevin Owens. And, again, this I decided that this was the more well done of the two. The Shield one was sad. This was more of a sadness that I think was intended, which is they really made you feel for Chris Jericho in this segment. And these were two heels. These two guys had been together for the previous year. They were a bunch of jerks, very annoying heels. And, for them to be able to pull this off successfully in the way that they did, I think was just a testament to how this segment was laid out. And just from the moment Jericho came out wearing the silly hat, he gave this impassioned speech after all the comedy was over about how important their friendship was, how he valued their friendship. And again, this was not completely unexpected. This was not unpredictable. They had been teasing a breakup between these two for a while. Just because it may have been predictable doesn't make it bad. I think the way they pulled this off was genius. KO giving him a new list. Jericho takes it out of the box, and we watching at home can see that on the back it says the list of KO, and Jericho can't see that. But he looks at the list and he goes, hey, wait a minute, how come my name's on this list? And then Owens just drops the mic, he drops the Universal title, and he attacks Jericho, beats the crap out of him. You felt bad for Chris Jericho. Then he throws Jericho face first into the screen shatters. This was great stuff. And to think, it almost didn't even happen. Jericho told the story that all day that day, he had to fight to do that segment in the way that it ended up being done, where they work up to the big reveal. Creative just wanted to have Kevin Owens just attack him. And Jericho had shouting matches with Triple H. I think Vince maybe wasn't there that day. And so he was working with Triple H. Triple H said, no, we're going to do it this way. We're just going to have Owens attack you. And Jericho stood his ground. And so they had shouting matches. And Triple H said, you want me to call Vince? I'll call Vince. And Jericho says, sure, go ahead, call Vince. I'm not budging on this. I'm going out and I'm doing this the way that I want to do it. And it just got to a point where finally Triple H was all exasperated. And as I'm sure he's been with Jericho many times before. And he just said, do whatever you want. Well, thank God he did. Because this was just pitch perfect the way they did. By the way, hell of a creative team they have there. You have this guy pitch this idea and they say, no, we'll just have Kevin Owens attack you. That's their great idea? Really? No suspense, no creativity behind it, just attack him? That's their grand idea for this? Thankfully, Jericho has some pull. And he was able to stand his ground because I think this is one of the all-time great betrayals in company history. Number 9 is The Rock, going from People's Champion to Corporate Champion at the Survivor Series in 1998. Now, yes, it was a tired play off of Montreal, but The Rock, I don't think some people really fully understand because it was such a brief period of time. But when Rock lost the IC title to Triple H in that ladder match at SummerSlam in 98, there was a period there of 2 months where Rock was, I would say, just about on the level of Stone Cold as far as his popularity with the fans. He, like overnight, this guy went from being hated heel to monster babyface. People loved The Rock. He just exuded, I guess whatever, this coolness about him. People just took to him. And they threw all of that away. Because A, they already had Stone Cold. He was their A1 top babyface. And B, they knew that they needed to set up a big heel that Austin could feud with and Austin could beat for the championship. And Rock filled that role perfectly. Now you could say they did something similar recently with Roman Reigns and Braun Strowman. Hey, why do we need Braun Strowman as a babyface when we have Roman Reigns? I would argue, do you really have a babyface in Roman Reigns? Is he really beloved the way Austin was back in 98? No, I don't think so. So I'm not so sure that turning Braun was the smartest thing either. But here it made sense. Things certainly worked out pretty well with that whole Austin-Rock feud. And he betrayed the fans, right? I mean, he betrayed the fans. He turned his back on them and literally went from being called the People's Champion to the Corporate Champion. And that was one of my favorite periods of Rock's character in his career. That whole Corporate Champion era leading up to WrestleMania 15 I thought was just fantastic. And so I have that at number 9. Number 8, Paul Bearer turning on The Undertaker at SummerSlam 1996. This was the big boiler room brawl with Mankind and The Undertaker, which is a favorite of mine. I love that match. And Paul Bearer was in the ring. He was standing there with the urn, and the idea was that they would have to fight out of the boiler room in the bowels of the building and brawl back down the aisle into the ring, and the first person to retrieve the urn from Paul Bearer would be the winner. So they brawl out to the ring, and Undertaker's, he kneels down, give me the urn, and Paul Bearer turns away. He turns his back on the Undertaker. And Mankind attacks him. Mankind ends up winning. Paul Bearer takes the urn. He bashes Undertaker in the head with it. These two had been together for 6 years leading up to this point. Or just about 6 years. I know when he first came in, he had Brother Love. Within a few months, he had Paul Bearer as his manager. You can go back even further if you want to, break through the WWE storyline aspect of it. Because, when Undertaker was Big Red or whatever his character was, in like the late 80s, he had Percy Pringle as his manager. So he was managing Undertaker before he was The Undertaker. But in WWE, these guys have been together for 6 years. That's why I make fun. You look at the Bellas and the Rousey being on WWE's list. They were together for 2 or 3 weeks. How could something like this not be on your list? These two were together for 6 years. They were the package deal, Paul Bearer and The Undertaker. You can't have one without the other. Well, I guess you can, but that was a big deal back then if you were a fan of the product at that time. Number 7, Stone Cold betraying the fans, much like Rock did, right? I had that at number 9. Rock turned on the fans. Well, Austin did the same thing in Houston at WrestleMania 17 to win the championship. He sold his soul to the devil and he shook hands with Vince McMahon. So this wasn't just a heel turn. I consider that to be a, betrayal. Now, again, it may not have turned out the way that they probably had hoped. And by before the year was even over, they had abandoned it, and Austin was already back to being a babyface. Business took a nice dip after they did this. I don't know that it really ever recovered back to those same levels of popularity, although now they're making more money than ever before, so go figure. But this was a big betrayal. Austin turned his back on all of his fans. It didn't seem like it that night because they cheered the shit out of him when he won. But I consider this to be a pretty big betrayal. He went with his boss, the guy that had tormented him for all those years. He chose his boss over his fans. Number 6, Owen Hart kicking his brother Bret's leg out of his leg at the Royal Rumble in 1994. There had been dissension amongst the Hart brothers in the months building up to this. They did that great angle at Survivor Series in 93. They had the Hart brothers beat Shawn Michaels and the Knights. And then Owen, who was the only Hart brother eliminated in that match, he comes back out. There's a pushing match with him and Bret. Then they made up. I remember watching television at the end of 93. It was around Christmas time, and there were these promos of Bret and Owen. Oh, we made up. We're great. Now we're going to go for the tag team titles, and we're going to beat the Quebecers at the Royal Rumble. So they go to the Rumble, and Bret hurts his knee during the match and can't recover, and they end up not winning the tag team titles, and Owen is very upset about this. And what does he do? His brother Bret has a bum knee. He kicks his leg out from underneath him. He attacks his own brother, his own flesh and blood. And of course it led to, it led to the infamous promo backstage by Owen, but it led to a great match at WrestleMania, an even better match at SummerSlam, just a great sibling rivalry feud. That in a lot of ways carried that company through 94. Now, business was not exactly booming for WWE in 94, but they were in rebuilding mode, right? They were building around smaller, younger guys, not so much Hogan and Savage and those people. But, turned on his brother. Now we get into the top 5. So this is what WWE did, right? They did a top 5. This is my top 5. Number 5, Paul Orndorff turning on Hulk Hogan. Back in 1986. He probably turned on Hogan because Hogan could never say his fucking name the correct way. He always called him Orndorff. Go back and watch Hulk Hogan promos after Orndorff turned on him. He keeps calling him Orndorff. He couldn't say it. It's Orndorff. I'd have kicked his ass too. But it was great. They were enemies at one point. WrestleMania, remember the first WrestleMania main event? Orndorff saw the light, became a babyface. He ended up becoming partners and friends with Hogan. And again, there were signs that there were, like if we were watching it now with 2018 eyes, it's very obvious what they were building to. I don't know if it was as obvious back then. It probably was. But they were doing the slow burn, slow build to this. And Orndorff would call Hogan, couldn't get him on the phone, thought he was being a prima donna. And it built to a tag team match. It was Hogan and Orndorff against Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy. Hogan got knocked backwards accidentally, knocked Orndorff off the apron, and that turned out to be the straw that broke the camel's back. End of the match, Orndorff clotheslines the shit out of Hogan. He hit him with a pretty stiff lariat, gave him a pile driver, ended up aligning with Studd and Bundy and Bobby Heenan, and went on to do some big business together. Did Hogan and Orndorff, Hulk, Orndorff. But the Hogan-Orndorff thing in 86, and they get it built to the cage match on Saturday night's main event, where both their feet touched the floor at the same time. That was a big deal. That feud was a very big deal. It was a very big betrayal at that time. That was early in my wrestling fandom, watching Hulk Hogan in those days. So that's number 5. Number 4, the Mega Power Split. I maintain to this day this is one of, if not the greatest storyline that they ever told. The care that they gave this thing, the way that they built this up over such an extended period of time, well over a year and a half, really. If you think back, it was the fall of '87 when Savage and Hogan came together as the Mega Powers. Elizabeth brought the two of them together, and they went through all of '88. Savage had won the WWF Championship, and again, same thing. They were building things slowly, but you could see some cracks in the armor, and you could see some jealousy there on Savage's part. Now, I hesitated to put this on here at all as a betrayal, only because when I look back on it now, you can make the argument that it was Hogan who betrayed Savage, because it was very obvious that Hogan had the hots for Elizabeth. I mean, come on. If you were in Savage's shoes, you would have felt the exact same way, right? You're taking a back seat to Hogan. I'm the champion. Why am I taking a back seat to you? And Elizabeth, why are you putting your hands on my wife? Even though on television they weren't married at the time, but she's my woman. Why are you putting your hands on her? Hogan was quite the slimy little prick. If you watch some of the things he did on television back then, you don't realize it as a kid, or at least I didn't. But you look back on it now, it's like, man, this guy had some gall. So they built this thing up, and then the big turn came on the main event special early in '89. That is one of my greatest wrestling memories from back then, was watching that. And Savage turning on Hulk, betraying Hulk, attacking him then in the medical room in the back. Literally fighting over Elizabeth. She's on a gurney between them, and Savage clocks him with the championship and beats the hell out of him. And Hogan goes on a rampage in the back through the locker room looking for Savage. Ironically, the two guys that he grabs and assaults in the hallway, Bret Hart, who was with the Hart Foundation, and Shawn Michaels, who was part of the Rockers. These two little, I wonder what these two little jabronis went on to do with their careers. But the Mega Power Split is my all-time favorite thing in wrestling. More than Austin McMahon, more than anything else, is the whole Mega Powers formation, the Mega Power Split, and Savage betraying Hogan in '89. Then we get to the top three. Number 3, Andre the Giant. After years as a babyface, a fan favorite, and an ally of Hulk Hogan, going back to 1985, he turns on Hulk Hogan on Piper's Pit. He rips Hogan's shirt. He pulls off Hogan's chain, his cross from around his neck, and he aligns with Hogan. Now, that would be bad enough, right, if he did that. Not only did he do that, he aligned with Bobby the Brain Heenan, Hogan's nemesis. Heenan was hiring guys and managing guys left and right to try to take down Hogan until he finally got the grand prize, which was the Giant. And I just realized, man, that's how many betrayals for Hogan is that on here? Hogan was a hated man. I'm not lying when I say that, man. You look back on Hogan back then, these guys had a reason to hate this guy's guts. Hogan was never a babyface. He was a heel masquerading as a babyface. It's a great way to describe it. But this was a big, you can imagine, this was a very big deal when this happened. I mean, Andre was already past his point of expiration physically. But Andre turning on Hogan, which obviously led to the big WrestleMania 3, which is like a mythical, not a very good match, but just like a mythical match at this point, was, I think, not only, it was a big deal, and it belongs in, if you're going to do your own top 5, top 10, I don't see how you cannot include this on there. Number 2 is the barbershop window incident. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, they had been tag team partners for many years. There was some friction building. There were some miscommunications. And they decided, Brutus Beefcake decided, we're going to bring these two guys together on my show and try to work out this beef between them once and for all. And Jannetty made this great plea to Shawn, look, I'll take responsibility. I apologize. I want the Rockers to just rock on. And Shawn Michaels said, okay. And he put his hand out and they shook hands. And Shawn gives him a, as Gorilla Monsoon would call it, long before it was sweet chin music, it was a reverse crescent kick right to the chin. And Bobby Heenan was gold on commentary for this whole thing. He immediately says, I knew he was going to do that. I just knew he was going to do that. Michaels don't need Jannetty. I knew he was going to do that. And he picks up Jannetty and he throws him through the window of the barbershop. Still to this day, you wonder if it was Jannetty trying to escape, as Bobby Heenan said. And Monsoon was just beside himself every time Heenan would say something. He came up, Jannetty did, bleeding. Michaels kicked him a few times on the ground, and a star was born. This was the launch of the singles career of Shawn Michaels. To this day, people still talk about that barbershop window. There's a freaking t-shirt company named after it, for crying out loud. And it's one of those fond memories I have as a young wrestling fan back then. In 1992, WWF is one of my favorite years. So again, one of those things where I don't see how you can have a list of, forget top 10, I don't see how you can have a list of top 3 WWE betrayals and not have this on that list. Now, there's probably some of you listening going, wait a minute, I thought you were going to have that as number 1. What could possibly be number 1 on your list? Good question. That brings me to number 1. Now, I thought about this because I know there's going to be people who write in and say, that's not a betrayal. You can't put that on the list. That doesn't count. I would argue that it absolutely counts. I would argue that it absolutely counts, and there has never been a bigger betrayal in this company than the Montreal Screwjob in 1997. Now, the argument would be, well, it wasn't a storyline. Is this not a storyline list? Well, first of all, I never said it was. I never said that it was storyline only. But let's say it was, okay? It was a real betrayal, unless you're one of these Montreal truthers who believes that the whole thing was a work, in which case you can go in the corner and take your meds. If you believe that it was legit and it was real, I would argue that it certainly turned into a storyline as well. Was Montreal not incorporated into the storylines on television after the fact? I would wager that it was. In fact, Vince McMahon was on television not a week or two later, if that. Maybe that was the next night, I don't remember. Talking about the incident and talking openly about how Bret didn't do the time-honored tradition. Bret screwed Bret. Bret was supposed to do... He was talking about it in terms of, hey, this is fake, and this guy was supposed to lose, and he chose not to lose. And so I had to betray him and do what I did because he left me no choice. It turned into a storyline. It helped launch Vince McMahon as the Mr. McMahon character who I argue to this day is the greatest heel in the history of this company. What was a very real betrayal, was turned into a storyline. So when I think of WWE and I think of betrayals, I immediately think of Vince McMahon calling for the bell and screwing over Bret Hart at the Survivor Series, and Bret, obviously feeling betrayed and spitting in Vince's face and throwing furniture at ringside and everything that it led to after the fact. That was a betrayal. It wasn't, I think you could absolutely make the argument that this would qualify, and when I said, okay, I'm going to have this on my list, where do I put this? I immediately said, well, if I'm going to have this on my list, there's only one spot that this thing can be in, and that is the number 1 spot. And so, on my list, the greatest single betrayal in the history of this company is Bret Hart being screwed over in Montreal at the Survivor Series in 1997. And you could disagree with me on that if you want to, but you will not change my mind. That is the greatest betrayal, and it belongs on the list. So, that's my list of 15. I would love to hear from you guys, what you agree and disagree with. What does your list look like? I'll put this up on YouTube, of course. And you guys can leave comments in the comments section. Always fun to hear from you and how your list differs from mine.